An international meeting was held in Montego Bay, Jamaica, January 3rd to 7th, 2011, to discuss current vaccine science and policy safety concerns. Barbara Lowe Fisher is co-founder and president of the National Vaccine Information Center.
We have come together to evaluate vaccine safety science because there is a crisis upon us. And this crisis is fueled by a loss of public trust in what many doctors tell people about the safety of vaccines and the risks of infectious diseases. In the second decade of the 21st century, almost everyone knows someone who was healthy, got vaccinated, and was never healthy again. That anecdotal evidence is in part fueling a loss of public confidence in the quality and quantity of the science used to justify mandatory vaccination policies. While reports of vaccine-related chronic health problems and deaths have increased, and doctors inside and outside of government have continued to dismiss vaccine-related injuries and deaths as coincidental.
Delegates from around the world included senior scientists, physicians, editors of scientific journals, experts in vaccine regulation, social science and health policy, consumer child health advocates, legal experts, and members of the media. Dr. Christopher Shaw is a professor in the Department of Ophthalmology and Visual Sciences at the University of British Columbia.
And so there are many people thinking about the issues, that are wondering about vaccine adjuvants, that are thinking about how vaccines actually work, which in many cases we don't really understand. Thinking how adjuvants work, which we completely don't understand. And there is work being done, but what we accomplished this week is bringing some of those experts together to actually share their information with each other. And what's come out of it are some new collaborations. There are a number of us who will work together. There will be publications that will now come out. There's going to be an invited review on vaccine issues related to autoimmunity.
There's a lot of agreement about what the issues are in terms of the science, the methods, the gaps, the opportunities to improve and make the system better.
We have no baseline data on the medium to long-term health outcomes from fully vaccinated populations compared with those who have not been vaccinated. Now, these are baseline data that should have been obtained, and we have no idea whatsoever. And that is a study that really, really needs to be done, because we've never seen so many sick children, so many children with chronic immune and inflammatory conditions.
The major gaps are understanding what adjuvants do. The gaps are really the kind of whole range of safety issues across the human population, from prenatal all the way through to old age.
In respect of my area of science, which is the role that aluminium plays in this subject, that there really are some very large gaps that we need to fill in.
The major gaps in vaccine safety research concern the mechanisms at work in adverse effects.
From my perspective, one of the major gaps has to do with the inability to detect problems with safety prior to licensure, because we are using placebos that are reactive.
And it is essential to have the control group include an inert control such as saline in order to properly evaluate safety issues germane to that vaccine.
Given that, we have huge gaps in our knowledge of what any vaccine component will do to human health, especially over time.
Well, I think the thing that impressed me about the conference was the high level of scientific presentations that were being done. For instance, what is the toxicity of some of the things used as adjuvants? And some of the speakers who were senior scientists had done some very high technical research demonstrating the mechanism, the degree of the damage that was being done, and long-term effects of using these types of adjuvants.
I was convinced that we should not be against vaccines. Vaccines most probably have beneficial effects, different vaccines, and therefore we should do a good science and not just declarations which are not based on real scientific data. That's extremely important to convince or to find out which vaccines are dangerous, what is the best timing, how many vaccines we should deliver at the same time. If they are toxic, we should change our protocols. So therefore, the science is the most important in this case.
What we know from reviewing the clinical trial data is about a third of people who participate in clinical trials have some type of reaction. Mostly it's fever or local reactions. We know that other people have serious reactions. We don't know exactly how many people have particularly serious reactions because the monitoring systems after licensure are not set up to detect rare adverse reactions.
We don't know what happens with multiple vaccinations, especially with children today that are receiving a huge number of pediatric vaccines. What happens to them when they're 50? What happens to them when they're 70? Are the incidence levels of the diseases such as Parkinson's going to increase? For example, there is evidence, and we heard some of it here, linking Lou Gehrig's disease to aluminum from various sources. There is evidence that we didn't talk about linking Parkinson's disease to aluminum from who knows what sources. There is evidence linking Alzheimer's disease to aluminum. If you're exposed multiply to some of these molecules, especially in early life, you could be creating the conditions where those diseases are subliminal and percolating for many years before they express as the clinical manifestation of disease.
And for me as an immunologist, it was a dilemma how the adjuvants as a common denominator for the mechanism can cause fatigue and can cause the neurological findings. By listening to my colleague, I have learned, for instance, how aluminium, as one of the classical adjuvants, can induce a chronic fatigue because it affects the muscles. It destroys the fibers of the muscles. So it's not surprising that you have fatigue.
The number of vaccines that are being implemented has skyrocketed, but the evidence has not come along with that to show that that program is acceptable, safe, and effective. That vaccines are being given in groups like neonates and groups at high risk for which there may be specialized concerns that have not yet been addressed.
This is a dangerous area of research for a number of reasons related to people's careers. And in medicine, this is probably the foundation stone of modern medicine, vaccination theory and practice. Challenging it is not necessarily a career-enhancing move. And if you're a younger scientist, you're starting off in your first faculty position, this is probably a pretty good way to make sure you don't go on. This is a pretty good way to make sure your grants don't get funded.
This has been the situation in the United Kingdom for probably almost 2 decades now. So very little original research on aluminium and human health is taking place in the United Kingdom.
I'll add to that. I think it's going to be a while before we see public funding for this area of research. I think those of us who do it from scraps of grants, and we cobble together little sources of money to do these studies, often not as thoroughly as we'd like to do them.
I hope we forge alliances across countries and across disciplines, and we develop an infrastructure to begin promoting and conducting research that goes beyond what any one of us can do in our own individual countries.
The government is not funding these kinds of conferences, unfortunately. And I felt that the only way that we were going to bring these scientists together is if I or other private donors were to fund it ourselves.
You should know that raising funds on vaccine safety problems is really a difficult task, and we expect that this type of meeting can help us to make good science.
A friend of mine who's an epidemiologist has tried to get a grant to study the unvaccinated population versus the vaccinated in terms of health parameters of all of the children. The national federal agencies have refused to fund it, despite many trials. He's a well-known epidemiologist and has been funded for other projects, multi-million-dollar funding. So they refuse, and he's had to go to a private organization to get funding for this project.
If we had shown the data we've shown for aluminum and claimed, and instead of aluminum we said it was ice cream, NIH would be talking about issuing requests for proposals to study ice cream. They would, I mean, we know that. But because it's vaccination, again, that sacred of sacred cows, they're not. And I'm hoping what we're accomplishing here is opening the door a crack so that it becomes more acceptable to have these kinds of discussions across a range of disciplines, across a range of opinions about vaccination, so that we can start to begin the process, and it will be a process, of making it possible for people to do the best possible science to finally answer the question, what is causing these diseases, what are we going to do about them?
But there were also few occasions in the literature which gave bad atmosphere around the vaccine, I would say, side effects. So once the scientists see what it happened, either to the scientist or what was written in the literature, they try to avoid this subject. Sometimes they try to avoid it because they will not be funded.
It is almost impossible in the United Kingdom to get any funding to work on aluminium at all.
My hopes are several-fold. One is that more physicians and scientists become aware of what the issues are that need to be studied. The second is that funds become actually allocated to address those issues. And the third is that the highest quality of science be brought to bear on those issues.
You would expect the government to be looking into every avenue, every possible research direction to find out what's going on in that and the other neurological diseases field. This is, as Claire has mentioned, it's enormously expensive. The burden falls on the taxpayer. It's going to fall increasingly on the taxpayer. These are going to become the leading health costs of this century in North America and probably everywhere if we don't get a grip on it. Understanding what's causing it should be a top priority of this government and the government of my country and everywhere else.
So we have a real problem in this country. The money for research is held in government and industry, which is why it's so important that Albert and Claire Dwoskin and their family foundation has come forward and is making a first step to try to fund these kinds of studies. And there needs to be other philanthropic institutions that come forward and fund this study.
And I believe that with the quality science that we saw presented and the experts that we had here this week, that we will be able to attract private funding if funding is not available from government agencies and the business sector, and that we will be able to get some of this science conducted and move forward on this issue to provide more information to parents for their decision-making purposes, and hopefully to change the way vaccine policy is established in the United States and other countries.